Persuading people to take the actions we want can be hard. Our teams and clients are bombarded with thousands of messages every single day. But there is a way for you to get above the noise. Stories. This is the Stories with Traction podcast, and I'm your host, Matt Zaun. Join my guests and me as we unpack the power of storytelling. We'll talk about topics like leadership, sales, and marketing, all through the lens of strategic storytelling. Enjoy this episode. 2 weeks ago, my wife and I inquired about getting work done in our house. One of the companies that we reached out to immediately sent out a sales rep. And within minutes of talking to this gentleman, I felt weird. Have you ever spoken to someone while they're trying to sell to you and you just don't feel right? And what's amazing to me is I was interested. I was highly interested. I was the one that reached out to them. And after this gentleman left my house, I was certain there's absolutely no way I'm going to do business with this company. He came across as extremely salesy. A week later, I reached out to another company and spoke to another sales rep, and I was so impressed that I didn't even ask about pricing. In fact, I asked for more. What else can you do for my wife and I when it comes to different fixtures in our house? I was so interested and excited to work with this company. What is it, though? What is the difference between individuals who are okay at sales and those that crush it? That's going to be the topic of conversation today, because today I'm joined by Marcus Chan, who is the founder of Venli Consulting Group and Six Figure Sales Academy. In addition, he recently put out an incredible book into the world, Six Figure Sales Secrets. Welcome to the show, Marcus.
Hey, what's up, Matt? First off, thank you so much. I'm excited to be here. And I appreciate you sharing that story, because I definitely have been so many similar situations, personally, where that you're ready to buy, but that person, based on how they ran that sales call, turns you away. So I totally feel that.
I was already sold, and he was trying to sell me. He was trying to sell me on the different features that I didn't care about. And I'm like, calm down. Like, I'm already ready to buy. Like, my wallet is about ready to open. I want this. I called you. And it became so slimy and salesy. I was giving him an alley-oop. All he needs to do is just take the ball and put it through the basket. And it's amazing how many people are teed up. They're ready to go, and they just blow it because they're so into this, like the sale. They need to close. They need to do this. And it's not about that. And you know that. So I appreciate your time today. I'm really interested in unpacking what's the difference between someone like that and someone who actually is crushing it in sales.
So what's interesting is, go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Oh, what I was going to say is, and it's such a good example of, I think, a transition a lot of people end up making. Hopefully they eventually make it when they actually become great at sales, because you go from kind of that pushy, have that commission breath, or if you're an entrepreneur, like, with a profit breath, a revenue breath, you're trying to close because you need the cash flow or whatever it is. But if you can make that shift to become a trusted advisor, then just like your second person you talk to, that you see them as a resource. In fact, you're actually asking more questions like, hey, how else can I spend more money with you? Now, you may not say those words necessarily, but you may say, hey, I'd love to get your opinion on this. What do you think about this? And they can help share insights and actually help guide you to make the best buy decision for you, because you actually feel heard.
Sure. I really like that trusted advisor, because what's amazing to me, and we'll unpack this because there is a story that you mentioned in your book that almost speaks exactly to this. But what's amazing to me is the scenario that I mentioned where I was really excited to do business with the other company. I was excited to work with this sales rep, this trusted advisor. They were asking me question after question after question to make sure that they were actually in alignment with what I wanted. The other sales rep just continued continued to talk at me for ad nauseum, really selling me on things that I didn't care about. I didn't care about different elements of the company. I didn't care about, X, Y, and Z, all these things that he was trying to sell me. And it's amazing. You actually mentioned a really good story in your book that I want to get to. Now, before we do, I do want to dive into more about your background, your history, your story, because I find it fascinating. So I really want to start there. And I want to talk about personality as well. So you had mentioned in your book, when you're talking about your story, you said, I wasn't born with all the qualities it takes to be a top performer. You had mentioned your parents. So they were immigrants. They come over here. They have an 8th grade education. They're unbelievably hardworking. They open up a Chinese restaurant in Eugene, Oregon, that you start working at very young. I believe you were 5 years old. You mentioned that you were one of, I believe, 6 in the family, living in a tiny house. So you were raised with gut-wrenching hard work, right?
100%. Like when you think about, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, at the very base level is like survival, right? Your basic
Sure.
essentials. And that's how we grew up early on. So, as a family, in the Asian culture, we're pretty tight knit. So, even though, yes, we had no money, but we were a family. So we all worked together, and I mean, everyone pitched in regardless of age. So growing up, I saw that. But I also saw what my parents sacrificed and how hard they had to work to build the life that they wanted to really have. And for them, that was working 80 to 100-hour weeks, working nonstop. And I saw this, and I was part of it growing up. And it's interesting because as you grow up in this environment, you experience different things. For example, when kids would get off of school, even in elementary school, they'd be like, "Oh, I'm gonna go, play with, go to someone's house and play." Etc. Like, "Where do you?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm gonna go to the restaurant and I'm gonna go chop mushrooms in the back." They're like, "What?" So you have a different idea about life, about childhood, about money, about scarcity, about selling, about business. You just grow up so differently, and you have different fears because you are shaped by what's around you as well. So early on, that was instilled very, very deeply into me is you got to work hard to have results. And I realized eventually later on, that's only one part of the equation.
Sure. Now, I appreciate you mentioning that, because I somewhat similar, not exactly your specifics as far as the work ethic and what you saw, but for me, when I was born, from the time I was born to about the time I was 11, my father was doing double Ironman triathlons. So for those of you listening that aren't aware of double Ironmans, go look up an Ironman triathlon and then double it. It's absolute craziness, right? And that was what I saw. I saw my father, who was an absolute machine. I mean, unbelievable work ethic. And that really positioned me, just like your story positioned you, that we both get into sales. And the work, the quote unquote work, I'm using air quotes because the work is so subjective, because what I witnessed my father go through, what you witnessed your parents go through, it almost is far superior work-wise to what we experienced in sales. And I found it very difficult because I get in sales and now it's, I want to go, go, go. I'm banging my head against the wall. I'm aggressively going after it. And as you know, and you speak a lot about this in your book, there wasn't any strategy behind it. I could work hard. I could work so hard I'm blacking out due to stress. I could work so hard, so many sleepless nights. That's good hard work. But now let's put strategy behind it. So do you think, first off, do you think that in order to be successful at sales, you need a specific personality and you need to have a heightened level of work ethic?
So I think what a great question. I think it definitely helps, right? I think what helps even more is if you have massive self-awareness, because when you have massive self-awareness, then you actually know what you do ends in what type of result. And I think early on, I didn't have that self-awareness. All I knew was I could work really hard. And in the past roles I was in, that was good enough. That was good enough to have pretty good grades. Like I think about even school, and some people are going to disagree with this, but I believe if you go to college or go to high school, if you just show up and try, you'll probably get B's and C's. Like, you don't have to be that smart to get B's and C's, right? C's get degrees. You can just kind of show up. But if you are a little more focused on what you're doing, the right behaviors within that work, you might be able to get A's, A pluses, etc. And I've always had kind of that mindset. And when I got into sales, I first tried the work ethic piece because I thought that could be. I'm like, I've always worked hard. Like, that's what got me here. And to a certain extent, that may work. But I think I was also blessed with the gift of starting B2B sales in the last recession, meaning there was less money out there, less capital, less funds, people more resistant. So hard work by itself wasn't going to cut it. I actually had to be better at my job. So when I first got started, I applied the same work ethic that I did to that I've always had. I was out working everyone. I made the most cold calls. I walked the most businesses. I did the most cold emails. My activity was easily 3, 4, 5, 10x everyone else, but I had the worst results. So, like, work ethic wise, first in, last out. Like, I was that guy, but the results did not align to it. And if you don't have that self-awareness, you'll just keep trying to do that. And I try to do that, right? But it'll burn you out, and you'll just get depressed, hate life, and want to quit sales. So that's why I think it's definitely one key component to have that, because if you have really good self-awareness and you have work ethic, then you know what to work on what things to work on that actually move the needle. But if you have only work ethic, the truth is, I know a lot of broke people who work way harder than I do. So work ethic alone by itself will not get you to where you want to go. It's working on the right things, the high leverage things that actually move the needle, that will generate the highest potential output.
It's interesting listening to you talk about self-awareness. You actually mentioned massive self-awareness. And to me, a lot of that comes back to humility. It's actually us humbling ourselves enough to recognize there are weaknesses that we have that we need to potentially surround with strategy to overcome. And what's interesting is typically you don't hear sales rep and humility in the same sentence, right? Because, a lot of times we're egotistical and we're ego driven, and we really want to go, and we want to crush those sales goals, and we want to achieve, right? But I do think there's an element of humility with this, because, and you speak to that indirectly in the book, that you're working really, really hard, but you recognize there are things happening that you needed to humble yourself to really seek the proper wisdom to do what you needed to do. So I really appreciate you mentioning that self-awareness. It's extremely important. I want to shift gears with something that you mentioned that I thought was really interesting, that I want you to talk about. You had mentioned scripts versus frameworks. I really like this. You said great actors and actresses have a script, but how they deliver their lines determines the impact. Everything matters. You go into inflection, pace, pauses, different personalities. But once they know the lines well, then they can adjust on the fly based on the partner that they're with, based on what's happening within different scenes and different reactions that are happening. So I want you to talk about the difference between the scripts and framework.
Awesome. So, and I'll share a little background, right? Because this is something I've learned over time. And I remember when I first came across this concept, in my first real shirt and tie job, if you will, it was an internship where I worked for a major Fortune 500 company selling car rental insurance. Right. So people would rent a car, I had to sell them insurance. And I remember in the very first week, we had this 1 week internship boot camp, right? We're in there and they're teaching us the sales script for this. And I remember it was a class of maybe 15, 20 other interns. And I remember taking them okay, I would read it. I'm I sound like a robot. So that whole week, every night, because I was living in Eugene at the time, and I came up a whole week in Portland for the whole week. So every night in my hotel room, once it gave us a script on Monday, I would go through literally hundreds of times, memorizing it, because I was I was so anxious about saying it. Just like in college, we would do these presentations with the group. I was so scared to look bad. I wanted to have it so well memorized that I knew that it would sound good when it would sound natural. So that whole week, every night I'm practicing it. I have it memorized, by the middle of the week, and it's flowing. And what was really interesting was at this point, it was still a script. Now, fast forward the following week, I had a chance to actually start using it because I was live in a branch And the first person I did the script on, I actually closed and sold them into the insurance. And fast forward 30 days later, I was one of the top, I was one of the top reps in the whole region. And this is out of all the full-time employees. They're like, who is this kid? What is he doing? And the second month, again, I'm one of the top again. And this is like, there's like probably 50, 60 different other, reps, interns, manager trainees, et cetera. And they're like, and I remember, this was it was July at the time, July 2005. And I remember one of the other interns called me, who was on the very bottom of all the rankings. And he's like, dude, what are you doing? I'm like, how are you doing all this? Like, are you being say something weird, something different? I'm like, I didn't understand. Like, what are you talking about? He's like, what are you saying exactly? I'm like, let me just kind of run through my whole script. And he's like, dude, that's basically what they taught us in training. I'm like, yeah, I know. Like, I know. I'm like, it's a script, but I took it and I've done it so many times now. Now I'm able to adjust a little bit to fit me. So it's not even a script, really a framework. And if I understand as a framework, I can adapt on the fly because I know it so well. And he's like, that sounds supernatural. I'm like, I know, because I've literally at this point done it thousands of times. But before I even got on a call with a potential prospect or a customer, I had already gone through at least 1,000 times before our first time.
Wow.
So I can make it natural and sound natural to me. And the way I picture a script or even a framework, whatever you want to call it, to me, I use almost interchangeably. It's much like driving on an 8-lane freeway. Everyone's heading in the same direction, but based off the traffic and what's going on with other cars, you might speed up, slow down, change lanes, slow down, go to other lanes. Maybe you might have to merge off, merge back on, but you're still going the same direction. And that's what a script or framework is designed to be like. And this is why when you see the greatest actors and actresses, they all have a script, but it's how they deliver the script that makes it personal, human, just like them. It does not sound robotic. And when you start to internalize that, you start looking back and realizing every single word that you, I, anyone else says is actually from someone else that we learned. Every single word what we say, even our little mannerisms, it's because we've learned from someone else, which is basically their script. And all we've done is taken that and put it into our head and now repeat it. And we don't even realize that's what it is. That's why a young kid who lives in a completely different culture can pick up multiple languages, because they're picking up the script from somebody else. So we start realizing scripts are just frameworks all around, and they come from everywhere. But if you know how to focus your energy to have the right type of scripting or framework to follow and how to adjust it, then you can make it natural and you can make it fit the situation, the context you're selling into.
Sure. I love that. It's like same bones, different muscle.
That's it.
It's having different muscle with what we're doing depending on who we're working with. I love the 8 lanes of traffic, right? Because sometimes we need to gauge, hey, if we're all the way over in the left lane and we got to get over to that one exit, we got to make that right. We need to figure out, do we need to speed up? Do we need to slow down? How do we safely navigate that to do? I love that example that you mentioned. So let's talk about practice, because so many people will ask, how to make sure that it doesn't become robotic, mechanical, it doesn't become mundane and boring. How do you balance the two between a heightened level of practice and going over, potentially role playing, potentially going through that script again and again, and still being energetic and having enthusiasm and having some emotions to back that up? How's that balancing act?
Great question. So the first piece is understanding, like, when you think about really anything, if you look at enough of the same thing, you start to see patterns, right? If you look at enough essays, you see a pattern. If you look at enough content, you see there's patterns to the right post. You look at enough books, the same thing. If you look at enough of your sales calls, you start seeing there's a pattern. And when you understand there's a pattern to it, that means there's a process in place. And the best salespeople understand there's a process. It doesn't necessarily mean it's linear, like, okay, I'm gonna hit step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, 5 in the sales call, but they understand that there is a process. So the first step is being massively aware. What is the existing process you're doing? That's the first step. And I think the mistake a lot of people make is, they copy my book or they see something on YouTube and they're like, all right, this is a better process. Let me completely change everything that I'm doing. I think that's a huge mistake because there might be parts that you're already doing a really good job on. You just need to make a little bit better. It's kind of like if you get a brand new car. I personally like music a lot, but when I get a brand new car, the stereo settings aren't quite right. So I don't need to get a whole new stereo. I just need to first adjust the treble, adjust the bass, adjust maybe the style of the music so it comes in the way I want it to sound. So when you take a look at your current process, it's the same thing. You take a look at what am I currently doing? Do I have at least core fundamentals? Do I have maybe at least a kind of an agenda at the very beginning, kind of set the tone? And then do I have some specific questions I want to ask? And what type of questions are they? And then once you have that, do you have a follow-up next step or a close at the very end? How does that actually look? And you start mapping that out. That's a first step. So you have an idea about what the process is. And then how can you tighten up even more? How can you improve a little more? So I'll give you a really good example. So I'll listen to a call recording for one of the students in my program. Superstar. This guy is one of the top 15% reps at his company. It's a major company. And he sent me the call recording for a discovery call, which is like the first intro call to kind of dive into the situation. He did an amazing job, right? And I looked through, fundamentally, he had all the core things. And the only thing we really need to add, which is really not even really scripted, it's really being able to take one question and go even deeper. And that's really it. And sometimes reality is like, when you're on a sales call, they're a human being. So you have to be able to understand the whole process so you know to go deeper, right? Or another example is, I listened to another call recording, a newer sales rep, and they had these questions they wanted to ask. So as they started running through the call, it becomes almost robotic. And then the customer early on in the conversation starts sharing something that eventually you're going to want to find out anyways, right? They start sharing a little bit about the decision-making process, which is very important to understand. They start sharing early on the process. And the salesperson is like, oh, cool, thanks, writes it down, on to the next question. But the reality is they only got to the surface level of that question. They actually need to go deeper. But in their head, they're like, well, that's a further in the process. So you go back to the 8-lane highway, it's like, based on how other cars are driving, that's an opportunity. You're already there. Like, sure. you might as well, go all deeper into that hole, uncover the whole process, and then transition to the next question. So the first step is being really aware of what your current process is, mapping out what are the stages that you want to cover, what are the things you want to know. And then from there, you start to tweak it and start to improve each part to get to where you want to go. And one really simple way to uncover what you need to improve in your sales call is just look at the last 10 opportunities or last 20 opportunities that you did not close. You did not close. What exactly was it that you did not uncover up front that you could have leveraged to close it on the back end? So I'll give you a really simple example. So, I'll watch another call recording from another rep, and what ended up happening is they had to let the CFO know to get buy-in, right? So now the deal's been stalled for like 2 months now. We don't know who the CFO is. We haven't talked to the CFO at all. There's been no engagement. So that's why this deal stalled out. But if we know that to be a really common challenge of why deals get stalled out, then why not you incorporate it in the top front of your sales process? And you dive in deeper up front and you get them involved to get their executive buy-in before you move deeper in the process. So when you start thinking this way, you're able to actually reverse engineer your process. But it starts with number one, knowing what your current process is, how you stage it, and then how do you start tidying up and improving it? And then how can you start reverse engineering areas that you miss back into the beginning?
That's awesome. So it almost reminds me of like looking at analytics with video. So, there's a lot of different platforms out there. You put out a video, you see, all right, people will get to the 3rd minute. And when they're at the 3rd minute, sometimes they rewind. Why are they rewinding? Oh, is it because this one point, I need to expand it? And then maybe they're only getting to the 7-minute mark and then it stops, even if it's a 15-minute video. Why is that? It's almost like you're reverse engineering the entire meeting to try to put different questions and scenarios up front. I love that. That is awesome. Wouldn't it be amazing to have like analytics on all the meetings, like the in-person meetings we have? That would be amazing. But
oh yeah, I mean, but the first step is just watch your own call recordings.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
And you'll see like, oh, like, geez, like I really didn't articulate that very well, or oh, I could have gone deeper there. That's the first step, right?
That's a really good
point. And then you'll already start seeing that without any analytics.
Sure. That's a really good point. So one of the things that you mentioned about the human being element. So as good as it is to see the numbers and the analytics and everything, as far as maybe I could have done this right, you had mentioned at the end of the day, it is another human being that we're doing business with, right? And you mentioned in your book about the difference regarding numbers game and the relationship. And I think that you mentioning, it's a human being, I think that's a really good segue. So about 10 years ago, I read a book called Go for No, and it was really good for me at the time. Okay. And it was good for me at the time because it gamified my business when it came to a sales perspective. And what I did was I literally put on my wall different numbers and metrics on how many no's I wanted to get in a specific month. Basically, looking at all of the different numbers, saying if I get X amount of no's, it's going to equate to this amount of business. So it was good to gamify. It was good to really focus on the numbers. But then at the end of the day, I had to really say what you just said, is that you're talking to a human being. They're not robots. They're people. And I
Yeah.
think there is a balancing act. You speak very, very eloquently too in your book, but you talked about getting crystal clear on your ideal customer. And then you said, have you ever had a sales manager that said it's about the numbers, or smile and dial, and the more hands you shake, the more money you make? So can you talk about that balancing act between the numbers and the metrics, and then also the human element?
Absolutely. I think, in my opinion, I think a lot of people interpret the numbers game in the wrong way, because I find really weak sales leaders, in my opinion, their go-to answer for someone underperforming is to say it's a numbers game, crank it the activity. I want you to make more calls. I want you to send more emails. I want you to keep, knocking on more doors. I want you to just ramp everything up. I want you to see more people, do more demos. I want you to do all this. To me, that is much like a doctor trying to prescribe a solution or medication without diagnosing the situation. Because the reality is if the emails, let's just say for example, emails, if the emails are only getting a 5% open rate and like a 0.01% reply rate, throwing more emails out only scales crap. So if you're trying to scale crap, sure, you can do that, right? Or you can focus on the right type of numbers and actually improve it. The better question is, we're at 5%. How can we make it 30, 40, 50% open rate? I don't. The reply was not very good. How can we improve that? Improve the email copy, right? And we started thinking this way: you're actually working to improve conversion ratios versus just playing a high quantity game. And when you start thinking this way, you start shifting how you think. You start thinking about, okay, if I'm the other person receiving this email or this cold call or this sales presentation, how would I feel? How would I react to that? And you start shifting from thinking about just numbers by itself, but you start thinking about selling as really, serving at the highest level. And if you really believe your solution can truly positively impact another company, a person, their lives, their organization, their initiatives across the board, to sell them is an ultimate service to them. But you can't do that through just like hitting them super hard nonstop and having bad messaging and playing the quantity game. You have to do it through quality. Because the funny thing is on the opposite side, that sales manager who's saying, then play the numbers game, they themselves hate getting cold called. They hate getting cold emails. They hate getting put into a sequence. So we already know we don't like that behavior. So why not change it? And what happens is when you start making this shift, even from a targeting perspective, you start realizing not every prospect is the same. And instead of just mass blasting everyone, I'm going to focus on this specific market that I know I can help, that I know their pains, wants, desires, or interferes, all their thoughts. I can read their mind, essentially. If you focus on that one specific niche, and then you go after that, and you truly serve them, they'll feel it too. They'll feel it in your messaging. They'll feel it in your outreach. They'll feel it in everything. And it's funny because, for opportunities we have in our pipeline, and we sell to some of the most skeptical people in the world, which are salespeople, right? Which are very skeptical. It's funny how often they'll comment and compliment, just our process, and they'll be like, "This is exactly how I want to do it." I'm like, "Yeah, because you're a human being." Like when you play the numbers game, is understand how do you interpret that? Is it I'm going to play through the quantity, or is it I'm going to make sure I have the right number, right conversion ratios, which truly serves the other person receiving it.
It's so powerful. It's so powerful. And several years ago, I heard a gentleman say to me, if you're a doctor and there's someone that is out there that's sick and you actually have something that they need to make them better, it's almost heinous and evil to withhold that from them. Like your duty as a doctor is to help people as much as they can be helped. And it's speaking to your point that if you have a service, you have a product that will significantly enhance someone's life, to hold that back is doing them a major disservice. We have to figure out a way to really get it in their hands, get in front of them in the most human way possible. And I think that that's a good transition to your story regarding the doctor who worked with you, because I think this adds to the human element. I love this story that you mentioned in your book. This is one of the many reasons why I just love your book, The Six-Figure Sales Secrets. It's just gorged with incredible stories that are learning opportunities and then backed with different scenarios. It is just gorged with info and wisdom, and I really appreciate it. One of the stories that you mentioned was you were in a sales role, and 2 months in, you get called into your boss's office, and he's threatening to give you a performance improvement plan. Everyone hates those. And you have this sense of fear, of stress. And then soon after that, you went and you met with your doctor. And you mentioned that she barely talked. She wasn't talking at you. She was asking questions that led you to a certain decision-making process. And after the meeting, you talked about just how blown away you were that she actually sold you on something. She sold you a specific idea, and you did most of the talking. So can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And the reality is if we as salespeople say it, it's probably not true. But if the prospect says it, then it must be true. And when you understand, internalize that, you realize the way to sell is not through telling, it's through asking. And this is why I remember that specific experience where I look back, I'm like, wow, that was really impressive. And when I really think about the whole situation, how the doctor sold me into completely changing my diet and everything, it starts with the whole process of how even doctors are structured and an office is structured. So when you think about this, when you go book an appointment with a new doctor or existing doctor, you go first and you fill like either an online questionnaire or a paper questionnaire. And even if you've been there many times, they make you refill it every so often. And then when your appointment comes, first a nurse comes, brings you in, and they start asking you questions first. They start asking more questions. What brought you in? They're taking your blood. They're weighing you. They're taking the blood pressure. They're doing all these things even before the doctor comes. They're asking all these questions. They take all that data, they input into their laptop or on their board or whatever they're doing, and then the doctor comes in. And the doctor, again, revalidates and asks sometimes even the same questions in a different way. And they're asking more and more questions to uncover your situation. And then based off that, then do they prescribe a medication, a next step, or whatever it's going to be? And what happens is because you are being forced, if you will, to answer questions and also to really think and pause. Now you're internalizing the situation much more. And as something before you know it, even if you have what I call a latent need, which is a need that you did not know you have, versus an active need. An active need means you actively have a need. So, for example, if I been thrown up, I know I have an active need for some sort of help. A late need is something's going on. I have no idea. That doctor that I was with, based on the questions, based off what she was measuring, she's like, "Hey, you've gained some weight since we last saw you. You've also your blood pressure has really skyrocketed," which made sense because I was a new B2B sales role, right? So it's like, wow, that's really enlightening. So now I'm sold that I have a problem. So what happens once you're sold you have a problem, the natural next question is, how do I solve it? Now I'm open to that conversation. So she sold me two things. Number one, she sold me on a problem. And then number two, she sold me the solution. The thing is, when she sold me I had a problem, she just asked me questions and then provided a summary insight. I'm like, oh my gosh, you're right. Like when you're stuck in the woods, you don't see the forest, right? So and then she's able to recommend that. And I think about a sales process so much like this, where if it's an inbound prospect, usually they already know they have an active need. They're just looking at other options, but you still want to dive in deep. Run what I call the 90-10 rule, which is 90% asking questions, 10% actually going over your solution, assuming it makes sense, right? And if you do that, it's a super easy close. Or if it's completely cold outbound and you book that meeting, you definitely need to do 90-10 because they don't believe they have a pain. So you just, you happen to book the meeting. So now you have to be able to go through that, right? And I'll give you a really, really good example of how powerful this really can be. So this is a couple years back, and I was with a rep, and we did a door knock. We walked into this business, happened to get the owner. It was a really large grocery chain, and he owned multiple operations. And we walked in, happened to get the owner, and the owner's like, "Yeah, I got some time. I got 5 minutes." So we sit down with the owner in his office, and we just do a deep dive. And fast forward 45 minutes in, this guy's like entranced in our conversation.
Wow.
We haven't told him what we do, what we sell, any of our solutions. We simply have asked him questions. And I remember because it was right before, it was like 10:45. He's like, "Oh crap, we've been here for like 45 minutes. He's like, "I'm really sorry, guys, but I have to prepare. We're gonna have a huge lunch rush from everyone coming during lunch break the next couple hours. I gotta make sure the troops are ready to go. So can we set up another follow-up meeting? I'm really interested." And I remember this. I almost like laughed. He's like, "Guys, I don't know what you have to sell me, but I know I have a problem. I need to buy whatever you have to sell me."
That's amazing.
I was like, wow, this is amazing, right? And we book a meeting for the afternoon, and we leave. And I'm talking about rap. We're like laughing. I'm like, this is the power. Like, we literally presented absolutely nothing. He went from a completely doing his own business, had no idea he had an issue, to we took him from a latent need to an active need in 45 minutes, not by telling him anything, by simply asking questions. He came to his own conclusions that he had a big problem. And then, of course, my rep went back that afternoon, closed them, super easy, awesome, huge opportunity. And that was super simple, right? But that 10% of the presenting was so easy. Like half the time, if you do an amazing job on the front end, they're not even asking about the price. They're just like, "Dude, I need this. What do I sign?"
Yeah, and that's an amazing story. I very much appreciate you sharing that. Now, one of the things that I will say, though, is how much of that speaks to us growing as people, as us really learning how to communicate, learning, relationship dynamics, how to truly connect. Because, I mean, you at that point in your career, more than likely, you had some reps with actually talking with people, learning how to have a conversation, learning how to respond versus react. So wouldn't a lot of that go into our ability to actually just communicate as people?
So I think that's one part of the equation, right? And I'm gonna go back to the self-awareness piece, and I'll share with you what I ended up learning. So early on, I was told I had zero self-awareness. All right. Still working on it. Okay. Still working on it. And I remember early on, I was told this, and I felt it in my sales calls. I frankly did. I'd book some terrible meetings. I'd walk in, and it was supposed to be like a 30-minute meeting. It'd be like maybe 5-10 minutes based off how I was carrying myself, based on the questions I was asking. And early on, I would blame them. "Oh, that's just a bad prospect. Matt, he's a hard guy. Like, that's just how he is. Like, it's the economy, it's the recession. This is why. It's not me." Right? It had this ego. That's what it was. It was an ego. And eventually, I came across a book by Tony Robbins called "Awaken the Giant Within." And one of the things he mentioned in there is, if you don't like the answer, ask a better question. I remember like reading that over and over. I'm like, if you don't like the answer, ask a better question. If you don't like the answer, ask a better question. I'm like, huh, interesting. So I'm like, okay, so these calls aren't going well. What can I do differently? How can I better engage them? What can you do? Like, how could I adjust my tonality? How can I adjust what questions I ask? How can I adjust how I prepare? How can I control what I can control? How do I get a better end result? So when I started asking these questions, I started getting different answers. So when I started doing this started helping me improve every part of my process. And the most beautiful part about sales is you can have metrics for every part of your sales process. So if I had a discovery that did not convert to the next step of presentation, that told me something. I'm like, interesting. If I present to 10 people, or if I have 10 discovery calls and only one go to the next step, why? What happened to the other 9? What could you do differently? Was it better targeting? Can I do a better job on the call? What can you do differently to get that to, say, 2 out of 10, now 3 out of 10? So by doing this and forcing myself to look at the hard data, even if I didn't like it, and really understanding my metrics across the board, allow me to have awareness to start improving. Like the first step to growth is being able to look in the mirror and say, I have to improve. And that's really hard to do for a lot of people. It's so much easier to blame other people. So for me personally, to get to that point where in that situation with taking a completely cold prospect and to walk in and close them for a like 20, 30K opportunity in 45 minutes, that didn't happen overnight. That stemmed from me focusing on improving the game. And even to this day, now I've been in the B2B sales game for over 15 years now. I still measure every part of the process, and I still refine. I still even my own call recorder for sales calls. I still think, dang it, I probably could have done a better job here. I think I could refine that a little more. I think I didn't read them properly. Because sometimes when you're in the moment, you just flow. So that's why it's important to remove that ego and to pause and always constantly improve yourself so you can actually improve your communication. So I'll give you just a little extra additional things to think about as well. A lot of people don't realize this, but I grew up with a speech impediment. English is my second language. I didn't start speaking until I was 4 years old. And when I started speaking, I had huge issues. I went to speech therapy classes for years.
Wow.
This led to me being very insecure, unable to speak, not able to talk, definitely not on camera. In front of people, I could barely talk. But only by facing those demons and those fears was I able to start working on it. And I'm still working on it every single day.
Wow. That is extremely powerful. And hopefully it gives hope to people out there that do feel inadequate when it comes to their communication. Because you had mentioned that you felt that you have a low sense of self-aware, or people told you that you're not as self-aware. I never would have thought that. I feel like you have a very heightened sense of self-awareness based on interactions I've had with you in the past, knowing different elements of how you're conducting a conversation. I think it was very interesting for me to hear. And then also, for you to say that English is your second language and you had to work really hard at it, that for anyone that follows your content, they're probably bewildered by that because they've seen you on camera time and time again. So hopefully it gives people hope out there. So I very much appreciate you mentioning that.
Absolutely.
And in addition, I really appreciate your time with this conversation, Marcus, because I know you are extremely busy. Thank you so much. I do want to do a recap based on what I got out of our conversation today. I know there are others that might have gotten something else, but I got 3 specific things out of our conversation today that I want to thank you for. The first is I really appreciate what you said regarding work ethic is good, massive self-awareness is great. I love that. I love really focusing in on self-awareness and being humble enough to get feedback. There's a tremendous amount of wisdom in that. The second thing I got, which I really appreciate you mentioning, is be present enough to uncover patterns. This is huge. You're talking about different processes. Be present enough to uncover patterns within those processes. Love it. And then the third and final piece, I really appreciate you mentioning that this is that typically when we say something, our prospect might not take it as truth, but if they say it, it is true because they're the ones saying it. How do we get them to sell themselves and then present the solution to improve their situation? So those are the 3 top things I got from this conversation. Thank you again. If anyone wants to get more information on you, what you do, they want to learn more about the book, where would they go to get that information?
Awesome. So you can find me on LinkedIn super easily. Look at Marcus Chan. You head over to my website, venliconsulting.com. And if you want a free copy of my book, just pay for shipping and handling, just head to closewithchan.com.
Perfect. So I will include that in the show notes. I'll make it super easy for everyone. I highly, highly recommend people follow Marcus on LinkedIn. I have for quite some time. Every time he posts something, I am learning. And in addition, and I kid you not, this book that I read of Marcus is the Six-Figure Sales Secrets. It's one of the best sales books I've ever read. And I mean that sincerely. Highly, highly recommend checking it out. And Marcus, thank you again for your time. I very much appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you for listening to the Stories with Traction podcast. Please leave a review, since positive reviews will make it easier for others to find this conversation. Next episode will launch on Friday at 8 a.m. Eastern. Until then, remember, if you want to persuade with power and inspire those around you to action, you must share more stories.